Hey, everybody. Are you with me when I say life can be amazing at times, but it can also be extremely challenging? I know, I've been there myself, learned some valuable life lessons along the way, and now I'm here to help you. It's no coincidence you found your way to the Relevate podcast. I'm your host, Rena Olson, a self-proclaimed inspirer of others. Together, we're going to dive deep into raw and honest conversations with real people. My hope is that through these stories, you too will be inspired and ready to tackle whatever's holding you back or breaking your heart. Then you'll be free to live a life of purpose and true fulfillment. I promise it's possible. Let's Relevate. Hey friends, boy, do I have a treat in store for you. My good friend and client, New York Times bestselling author Karen White, is my guest on this episode of the Relevate podcast. For those of you who know Karen and her books, you're going to really enjoy this conversation as she shares more about her life, her journey as a writer, and some challenging times she's now facing. If you're not familiar with her books, I encourage you to check out her voluminous body of work that includes 25 novels at karen-white.com. She is one amazing storyteller and one of my favorite people. I think after listening to this conversation, you'll see why. Karen White, welcome to the Relevate podcast.
Thank you, Rena. I'm happy to be here.
It's just such a pleasure to know you as a friend, and have you as a client, and I think people are really going to enjoy getting to know you more, not only the person who's a writer, but the amazing person, fun person that you are. I think it's going to be a really amazing conversation. So thanks again for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule to have a chat with me.
It's a pleasure.
So let's just start off. Tell everybody a little bit about who is Karen White.
Oh, boy. Well, I'm very old, so I can't tell the whole story. But so I guess primarily I'm a wife, and I'm a mother of two, actually four, if you count my two fur babies.
Yes, please.
Quincy and Sophie, who my real children are pretty jealous of. But my kids don't live at home anymore. They're grown, successfully launched into the world. And
that's an accomplishment.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And yes, I thought if they survived me as their mother through teenagerhood, and they're still breathing and kicking, I did a good job. But yeah, they're good kids. They've always been good kids, so I can't take full credit for that. I've lived in Georgia for 27 years, though I married a Yankee, who I actually met in London, because that's where I was living at the time. Both my parents are from Mississippi. My father's family, actually, we come from a long line of Southerners. They've been in the country for over 200 years. Oh. They were Florida settlers, if you can imagine what that was like. They came over from England, Ireland, France, Germany to North Carolina, and Scotland, to North Carolina, South Carolina, kind of settled there. So I do have roots in Charleston that I recently found out, which was kind of interesting,
very cool,
considering what I write. And then they sort of migrated westward to Florida. And my hat's off to my ancestors, because if you imagine what Florida is like now in August, and that's with pest control, with highways, with air conditioning.
Wow.
If you can only imagine what it was like to settle the state of Florida before any of those things, I'm just like, they were either crazy, which is possible, or or just, my gosh, my hat's off to them, because I don't know if I've got that in me. That's just it's hard for me to go to a beach house in Florida in August that has air conditioning, and a pool. So I just can't even imagine. But anyway, my mother's family is Italian. She is second generation Italian from Sicily.
Very cool.
But I think her grandfather got off on the wrong boat in New Orleans and then sort of migrated towards Mississippi. So every Italian restaurant you would ever meet or eat in Mississippi, they are relatives of mine, just so you know. So yes, very interesting kind of background.
So fun.
And even though my parents both went to the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, my dad says that's where they met. My mother says no, they didn't meet until they were both working for Humble Oil and Refining Company, which became Standard Oil, which became Esso, which became Exxon. And my mother was in the secretarial pool. My father was one of the controllers or the accountants, I guess, at that time. And they carpooled. And that's to work each day. And that's how they met. And that, as they say, is history.
Wow.
But
And they're both still alive.
they're both still alive.
And they've been married how long?
Yeah, 60 years. But my father's job with Exxon took us kind of really exciting places, and including Venezuela. My dad worked in Manhattan for Exxon headquarters for a while, so we lived in northern New Jersey, very exotic. And then Venezuela. Then we lived in London for 7 years. That's kind of where middle school and high school for me. And a
How
year post,
fun.
yeah, and a year at post high school where I worked in London over the summertime, which was amazing. And then they moved to the Netherlands, and then my dad retired, and then they decided Nashville, Tennessee, why not? It was south enough for them because they wanted to return to their southern roots, but without the real heat and humidity. Nashville has a pretty much temperate climate compared to most of the South, and you're near the mountains and all that, and they really enjoyed it. They were there for about 20 years, something like that. And yeah, so I have 3 brothers and no sisters. That was sort of the sadness of my life, was that my parents did not see fit to give me a sister. Because my mother had 4 sisters, and I just loved, and her 4 sisters all had daughters, and so those cousins were like my sisters when we would visit. And but yeah, so I have 3 brothers. I'm the only girl, and that's. And like I said, I married a Yankee. My best friend in high school, Claire White, who is now Claire Cobelt. And she came to the American School in London one day, and we became best friends. And she was telling me about her brothers were like so nice to her, unlike my own. And I'm just like, those brothers can't possibly exist. But the older one is who I was really interested in, because he was at West Point. She showed me pictures in his uniform. I'm like, oh. And then I lived, on Regent's Park in London, and her parents lived out in Wimbledon in the suburbs. And my husband, who I like to say is much older than me, he's 3 years, but he was already in college when I met him. And he was visiting his parents, and I happened to be visiting Claire at the time in Wimbledon, and it was a weekend. And I guess it was summer break from school, because
So he wasn't the older brother.
No, he was not. He was the second brother, and so he had spent all night in a ticket line to get tickets for center court at Wimbledon. I think it was Borg and Jimmy Connors play or McEnroe. It's like one of the old greats from way back when, and he was in line. Now, my family always got tickets because we lived there, so we could enter the lottery, and we always hit the lottery and got like amazing tickets at Wimbledon. But this year, this was for his family, and he'd spent the night.
Oh, Tim.
It was not very attractive, and Claire and I brought him breakfast. And that's how I met Tim. And then once he'd cleaned up or whatever, and he was back at the apartment, I was lip syncing to Paradise by the Dashboard Lights when he walked into the room. And he wasn't impressed either. So not an auspicious beginning. But that's how I met my husband, my Yankee husband, because he's from New York. He was born in New York, actually, and grew up in Connecticut. And but my parents forgave me for marrying a Yankee because he's such an awesome guy. And
good thing. You were how old when you met him?
16.
No, I didn't know you were that young.
And now I'm 29. So not really, but yeah. So I know, isn't that incredible? Wow. And she's still
baby.
He finally forgave his sister for introducing us. But
and you and Claire are still best friends.
Yeah,
which
that's
super
as a matter of
cool.
fact, we're going to be spending a week together in Florida in a month. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that. And she was my maid of honor. I was her matron of honor. We're godmothers to all of our children.
Just so cool.
It is neat. It's nice having that kind of a life. So even though, God didn't give me sisters, he did really, and Claire is really, because she has 2 brothers. So we were definitely each other's sisters that we were meant to have.
Cool. And some type of Mick Jagger connection when you were?
Oh, yeah. When we lived in London, we lived in a really cool building. It was Edwardian. and it has a very interesting history. So when it was first built, it was built to basically be apartments for the Irish servants of the wealthy homes in Regent's Park, of which there's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful homes. And then somehow it kind of morphed into really high real estate. I mean, I looked at some of the flat prices recently, and I was just floored. But I know in the 70s, Mick Jagger lived in the penthouse apartment. And while I lived there, Cliff Richards, not Keith Richards, Cliff Richards, who is a musician and is a famous musician in his own right. When you walk by his flat on the ground floor, you could see all the gold records cool. Hanging on the wall. He might still live there. He lived there the entire 7 years that we lived there. And Joan Collins of Dynasty fame, because her daughter, Tara Newley, I went to the American school with me, and sometimes we would walk, if we left at the same time, we would walk to the tube station together. I didn't know that's who her mother was until graduation. And there's Joan Collins and these skinny jeans. And I'm like, wait, why is Joan Collins here? And then I realized, oh, that's her daughter. And I had no idea that she lived in the building with me at that time. And that was her daughter. So that's how clueless I was. But yeah, a lot of, other famous people, but, and us, and, we lived in a third floor flat. It was absolutely beautiful. We needed a big flat because there were 6 of us. And luckily, Exxon subsidized our living because I don't know how my dad could have afforded that. And we all went to the American School in London and St. John's Wood. So it was a great location. And it's very high real estate now. I think when we lived there, it was still, a very kind of Tony place to live. But now it's like completely, ridiculous. Like, yeah. It's basically Russian oligarchs who live there now. And they have like
whatever that is.
Serious guard gates now to get just to the building. And it was very weird when I took my kids a few years ago to see it. I wanted to get a picture of them in front of Harley House where I lived. And, there were guys with like guns, and we had to show our passports, and then we were only allowed 5 minutes, and we could only stand on the, in front of the front door. And yeah, it was very weird.
Very weird.
Yeah.
Well, and it was during that time that you discovered your love of reading.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes.
Or was it before
it
that?
It actually started before that when we were living in Venezuela, and I just went to a library with a friend just to get out of the heat because it was air conditioned. Because Venezuela, it's on the equator; it's always hot. Yeah. And I'm just standing around waiting for her to pick a book, and the librarian, and I was 9 at the time because my dad was a big reader of nonfiction. My mom, read her ladies' magazines. That was it. So, not a lot of books in the house. Lots of Winston Churchill and things like that, nonfiction historical books for my dad. But so, it wasn't like I wasn't known to pick up a book and read until that day in the library, and the librarian saw me just kind of hanging out. She's like, well, gosh, don't you want a book? What do you read? And I told her I didn't read, and she turned completely gray at that moment, and then turned around and pulled off the bookshelf a Nancy Drew book, The Secret of the Old Clock, and that kind of got me started. Because then I had something to do while I was hiding from my brothers while they were trying to put, roaches down my back and stuff like that, and poisonous frogs on my head, which they enjoyed doing. Yeah. But when I lived in London, I discovered the book Gone with the Wind.
Oh, yeah.
Because I saw it was 7th grade. And it's funny because my daughter Megan waited until she was in 7th grade to read it because she wanted to read it at the same time I did. She's also a huge reader. And I remember Linda Schwab was her name. And she was reading it in 7th grade, like quiet time. And I saw this book, and I've always loved big books. I mean, the big family sagas from, Susan Howitch and James Michener and Jeffrey Archer. I mean, those were like, I love those books. And all discovered, while walking to the tube, there'd be a bookstore, and I'd stop in and I'd get a big, thick paperback, and I could read them pretty quickly. But I saw this book Gone with the Wind, and I'd never seen it before. And I asked her what it was, and there was 3 copies in the library, and I immediately went and got one. I brought it home, and my mother was like, "You can't read that book." I'm like, oh, okay, I'll return it. Of course, I did not. I just had to read it in secret. And I just couldn't put it down. I couldn't do homework. I couldn't go to class. The only time I've ever played hooky in my life, because I'm such a straight arrow, never, now I'm not the kind of kid, who would play hooky to, smoke a cigarette. No, no, no. I play hooky so I could go up to the roof of Harley House and reek out with the wind all day.
That is epic.
Yeah, it was. And I tore through it. I've read it like, I don't know, 12 times now, but oh my gosh, I couldn't. And it's really funny because I was searching online. I Googled Mick Jagger Harley House. And if you Google that, you'll see it. There's a picture, a famous photographer did a photo shoot of Mick Jagger while he lived at Harley House. And there is a picture of him on the roof in that spot where I read Gone with the Wind.
That is so
I know,
cool.
I know. Isn't that amazing?
But y'all weren't there at the same time, were you?
I don't know the exact days. I think he moved out the summer that we moved in. But I do know I
so
babysat in the flat after he had left, and the baby's room was all soundproof. Because I guess he used it for, practice or whatever, but it had, the little the styrofoam kind of,
the egg crate thing.
Right.
Very cool. So tell us about your journey to becoming a writer.
A stupidity, really. I just,
Karen.
no, I mean, I was a business major at Tulane. I'm glad, business, you can't ever go wrong with what they teach you in business school. It still applies today. Even, understanding what a spreadsheet is, I had to do, remember Lotus 1, 2, 3? I had to do that.
Unfortunately.
And then database. I love that stuff. I really did. I had to take calculus and finance, though, not so great. I tell my husband now, he's a banker, so he thinks it's hilarious that if I haven't done it in years, but I used to be in charge of the checkbook and balancing it every month. And if it didn't balance, I would just reconcile it, just like, it's fine. We're missing like 4 digits here, but whatever, and I would just and it just drove him crazy. He's like, oh my gosh. But now we have, electronic banking, and you can see exactly what you have and what it's just, so there's really no need to, as I tell him, there's no need to balance the checkbook. I can see, as long as I have checks, that means we have money in the account, right?
Right.
It drives him nuts. But anyway, so yes, I was a business major, so I worked in the business field for quite some time, 5 years. And when I got pregnant with my daughter, I was an operations manager for a software development company. And, I was working 70 hours a week, coming in on weekends and holidays just to kind of get ahead of the stuff. Because when you're an operations manager, you really have your finger in everybody's pie. I was at the point, and this was, back in the 80s, so in early 90s. And I remember, because I worked with a bunch of guys with PhDs in aeronautical engineering from MIT, because they were designing computer-aided design software for like NASA, Department of Defense, Boeing. So it was very high tech, and I'm not high tech, but I did learn, if one of their computers went down, I was the one that had to make sure I would have to find a part. And like, I learned this is in the days of hard drives. I could replace a processor. I could replace a hard drive and just steal parts from different computers. And that was just, I hired the front office staff. I did all the, ordering. I did, personnel. It was crazy. They hired 4 people after I left to do my job. So that told me ahead of time that I'd be the perfect writer, because as an author, writing the book is just a small piece of the pie. Yeah. But anyway, so, and it just so happened that at the time I was about to leave on maternity leave, my husband's job got transferred down to Atlanta. So I'd always planned on being a stay-at-home mom, so it just kind of worked. So we moved down to Atlanta, where we've now been for 27 years. My daughter was 5 weeks old when we moved, and we've been here ever since. So that's sort of the journey. So I didn't work. That's when I really got back into my reading, because when I was working, I would read it, not voraciously like I had, but I would still be pretty consistent reader. I still loved books. I mean, how can you not? But you're newlywed, you don't have kids. Your life is your own. Remember those days?
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Long time
it's
ago.
a very long time ago. And so when we moved to Atlanta, it was all about, and then my son was born, let's see, nine months after the storm of the century. So that was December of 93. He was born. So I had 2 kids, 21 months apart. So the 90s were like crazy time for me, with the little kids chasing them around and all of that. And I guess around the time of the Olympics, the Atlanta Olympics in 96, I had read this series of books called Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, and it had been a long time since I'd had what we call a book hangover, and that's when you just cannot escape the characters or the setting, and you keep
awesome.
rereading and rereading. I had my husband take me to Scotland. We had a lovely 10-day vacation, left the kids with my mom, and I just and it spoiled me. I couldn't pick up, I always have stacks of books to read, but I couldn't pick up another book to read. And because I was just, every time I opened a book, I kept on seeing Jamie and Claire in Scotland. And, that was, so I just, my whole life I'd had teachers saying, you should be a writer. You're so creative. But I hated writing.
Really?
I did. Oh gosh. My joke is the only, I didn't even keep a diary. The only type of diary I kept was a journal in high school and middle school to record what I wore to school each day. So I'd never repeat an outfit.
Oh my God, Karen. For real?
Yes. So sad. So sad. I was an only girl. Okay. So when I lived in London, I was like the babysitter of, the year, because I had a little brother and I loved to play with him and his friends. He was such a sweet kid and I loved his friends and I would take him to the park and play with them. So when they needed a babysitter, they always asked for me.
Yeah. I
would babysit like 7 days a week. I had a lot of spending money and I spent it all on clothes. It was London. Come on. So, I would, if I had a writing assignment, I would write. And my teachers were like, oh my gosh, this is so creative, but F for penmanship. Because these were the days before,
She's not joking.
Yeah, yeah. and it wasn't until I learned how to type later in high school that I understood why my handwriting was so bad. Because I'm a writer. My stories in my head come out full-fledged, fully.
Fast.
And, I would try to write as quickly as I could to get the ideas down so I wouldn't forget them. And it was just so frustrating because I couldn't. My writing could not keep up with the ideas in my head. And I just found writing to be extremely frustrating for that reason, because my story would be on page 2 and my handwriting would be on paragraph 2. And I would lose so much. And it was just very, very frustrating. And I would always average a C in my writing assignments because, A for content, F for penmanship, and which wasn't really fair.
No.
But my teachers would always say, oh my gosh, you're so creative. You should be a writer. And I'd go like, ugh, never. And then when I learned how to type and I was typing, because I've played piano my whole life. So I have really good good hand-to-eye coordination. And within 2 weeks of learning to type on a manual typewriter, I was typing like 98 words a minute with no mistakes. It was crazy. Yeah. So all of a sudden
I'm a super fast typer too. And we learned old school,
yes,
where you don't look at the keys.
Yes. And because I played piano, that's how you play piano. You don't look down at your hands. Yeah. You look at the music. And finally I got it. It's like, oh, so this is how writing is supposed to be. But, I still had absolutely no love for writing. Writing is hard, and it just, it's like opening up a vein every time I, sit down at my computer. It's very it's very painful. And, you stare at that blank screen. It's like, okay, let me pull magic from the ether. It's like, that is not easy to do.
No.
Yes, I know being a neurosurgeon is very difficult too, but at least you have, textbooks and stuff that you learn on how to do it. This is not. There's no learning for this.
Yes.
And technique you could learn, but the actual creativity, that is something that I don't know where it comes from. So anyway, I was, I'd read these books. Yeah. But I'd read these books by Diana Gabaldon and I just couldn't pick up another book to read. And I just, heard the ghost of Mrs. Anderson, my 6th grade teacher, you should write. Like, oh, whatever. So I literally, like an idiot, just like, how hard can this be? Sat down one day at my computer and started writing my first book. And
really?
Then, yeah. And then
And that was your goal?
No, don't tell my children I said this, but I had 0 goals. I never thought, A, that I would finish a book, B, that I would publish it, C, that I would ever be a New York Times bestselling author. And I have to say that it's kept me humble even today as I start each book. that's the premise I start with.
Yeah.
I just want to tell a really good story. I want to write the kind of book that I would want to read. That is my end goal. And if a lot of people love it and want to read it and it puts me on the bestseller list, well, that's fabulous, because that means my publisher will want me to write another book.
Yeah.
So, it's all good. But yeah, when I first started writing that, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I just wanted to tell a story. And I ended up entering that book in a contest where the finalist judge was a New York literary agent. And I won the contest, and she offered to represent me. So she was my first agent.
Oh, that's an amazing story in itself.
Oh, it is.
Because most people who are writers struggle for so long.
Right. Right. No, I know.
I mean, what a
and
blessing
it's not like, but I have to
was.
say, I didn't start at the top of the heap.
No.
I had to
You
climb my
never
way.
do. It's always about baby steps, is it not?
It is.
And that's a pretty big baby step.
And that's why, especially in this business, it's all about, there's a lot of egos in this business. There's a lot of thin skin in this business. You can't be looking at what other people are doing. There are a lot of big, remember Peter Benchley did Jaws. It's the only big book he ever did.
Really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Margaret Mitchell. Even, Catherine Stockett, she did The Help, and I know she's been working on that second book. But when your first book is such a huge success, the mind games your mind plays with you. Like, can I do this again? Yeah. So in a way, I think if my first book had been a huge success like that, I might have also fallen prey to that second book syndrome, as they call it, and still be struggling with my second book. I totally get it, So in many ways, I'm grateful that, I started like at zero. Because my first two books were with a very small New York publisher, an independent publisher, still, wasn't self-pubbed or anything. It was still a publisher, but they were small.
Yeah. And how long ago was that?
My first book came out in 2000, so 19 years ago, when I was 3.
And you've written how many books?
25, yeah.
That is amazing. Truly.
I know. Well, and just stupidity, because, how hard can this be? Because I don't know better. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cheering you on from the sidelines, I have a little glimpse into how hard you work. And life of a writer it's hard work. You're 70 hours a week.
Yeah. 7 days a week.
Constantly, year round. And like you said, it's not just writing the book.
No, it's the promotion, it's the, it's the editing, it's the research, it's the
book tour, the social media.
The social media, which is what I like to call the brain suck of the world. But there's lots of good stuff with social media, and there's times when I really enjoy it. But when I'm on deadline and my publisher's like, oh yeah, so we're running this promo, you need to, share it across all, I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? That's the last thing I'm thinking about right now. Yeah. Or when Rena says, yeah, we have to do a video, I'm like, does that mean I have to wash my hair? Because when I'm on deadline, it's not pretty. Yeah.
Well, and that's how I got you to do the podcast, because you didn't have to wash your hair, right?
And I'm in my pajamas right now, so I'm not, but t-shirt, which
it's all good. It's all good. Well, let's talk about some of your books for those people who are not familiar with your work. How would you describe your writing style? Tell us a little bit more about your style and the kind of books you write.
Well, like I said, the kind of books that I write are the kind of books I like to read, and that's always about a female protagonist who is at a crossroads in her life, where she's in a deep hole that she is either dug by herself or circumstances have put her in there. And she's stuck at the bottom, and she doesn't think she can climb out. And then, and I like to tell people, when they expect their lives to change, you don't just wake up one morning and say, my life is going to change. Usually it's some external influence that combines with your own inner strength to help you start that climb. And it could be, in my books, I realize that I've used this more than once. A character inherits a house or inherits a child or something, that kicks them in the butt and gets them moving and really kind of self-examining, and finding that strength that we all have, but sometimes in dark times you don't think you have it. And I love exploring that because I think we've all in one way or another had, those dark times where you just can't see your way through it.
Yeah.
And I like writing about women who can overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't, and in the books that I like to read and write, there's always some mystery element. There's always some historical element. I love the way the past influences the present.
Mm-hmm.
And I love tying those two stories together. Sometimes I'll use the same character maybe as a child and then as an older person to sort of tie the years together and the mystery together. I love, family, especially Southern families and Southern towns. I love, making that the framework of my books. And I always have a little bit of a love story because, I'm a romantic at heart. I like to have that.
Yeah.
But my books aren't romances. They're not historical fiction. They're not mysteries. They have those elements. My books, I call them Southern women's fiction because my characters are always from the South or they move South. It's always about her journey. So they're women's journey stories. And although I have to say, a lot of men enjoy my books as well, which I think the historical element and my guide characters are always, strong men. They're not alpha males, but, they're good foils for the strong heroines that I create. And then about 10 years ago, I came up with an idea. I was literally taking a shower and a character of Melanie Middleton hit me upside the head. And I was like, whoa, who is this? And it turns out she's this 39-year-old OCD realtor from Charleston who specializes, she makes her living selling historic real estate in Charleston, but she hates old houses because she can see dead people. And old houses always have spirits who need her help solving a mystery. And of course, her sidekick in the first book, she inherits an old house.
Oh, yeah.
And that she calls a goiter on her neck initially. She comes to love it because I'm an old house hugger. So it hurt for me to write some of her character. But when she inherits the house, she realizes that this really good-looking guy, he's a best-selling author of true crime mystery, and he is writing a book about the disappearance of a woman who had lived in her house around Prohibition. And so, of course, they work together to solve that mystery, and that's the first book. So the rest of the series,
The first book
in the series. So there will be 7 books. The 6th book,
the Trad Street series.
Sorry, the Trad Street series. The 6th book in the Trad Street series, which is called The Christmas Spirits on Trad Street, will come out October 22nd. There will be one more in the series, but the whole series basically centers around.
So fantastic.
It sounds
So
like,
fantastic.
these are ghost stories, but they're not. All of my books, and these books too, they're all about the characters. All of my books are character driven. There's a lot of plot going on. I mean, the beach trees, we have Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Camille. That's a great backdrop, but it's the characters and how they react to their situations. And all of my books are about that. And the Trad Street series are no different. Melanie and Jack, Melanie is, when we meet her in the first book, she is really lost and struggling. She's estranged from both her parents. She has like one friend, and her life is her job. Yeah. And but then as you get to know her, you understand why she is the way she is. Her mother abandoned her when she was 6, and you understand why because we get to meet her mother later on in the series. And her father was an alcoholic, and he was the one who raised her. So she became the parent at a very young age, and to control her environment. That's why she pretty much became OCD, because everything in her life was so out of control, and that was her reaction to it. And so it's kind of funny, and I do kind of poke fun at her a little bit because she's a fun character. And there's some real laugh out loud moments, and much more so than my other books. But there's also some serious stuff going on. And, the theme of alcoholism is in there, and how different characters handle it and deal with it. And, but that's the joy of this series, to see these characters learn and grow. And of course, the cast of characters grows and grows and grows, with, additional family members and relationships. And it's just really fun. I always look forward to, starting the next book and like, okay, who's coming onto the scene in this book and who's going to be the main focus. But it's all, Melanie's growth. The entire series is about Melanie's journey in her, finding her own strength and learning to trust others, and not just rely on herself. So.
Oh, it's so much fun to watch people anticipate the next book.
Oh yeah, they'll read this book like in one day, and then it'll come out on the 22nd, and on the 23rd I'll have 6,000 emails. When's the next one? which is flattering, but I'm like, just read it again. You must have missed some stuff. You read it so fast. It just took me a year to write. Could you just take a little more time to read it, please?
Yeah, and I've heard you say these books really are fairly easy for you to write. I think the story.
Yeah, I would never say a book is easy to write, but I will say that every time I start one of these books, because I'm not starting with a blank page, I have certain givens. I know what the setting is. It's Charleston, South Carolina. I know the main characters, Melanie and Jack, and I know their, pretty much all the secondary characters. Again, I will introduce new ones, but those are the givens. So that, not starting every book with a blank page is huge.
Yes.
Plus, I have her backstory now. I have 6, when I start the 7th book, I will have 6 books of her character development. I mean, if I could have that with every book, my life would be so much easier.
And speaking of backstory, Trad Street, is there a recurring character?
Oh, gee. So remember I mentioned my sister-in-law, Claire.
Yeah.
So she married Rich Cobelt, who my husband and Rich Cobelt are like 2 peas from the same pod. It's almost frightening. When we get together, we love playing games together, all the families. And when the kids were little, we would put them to bed and then we'd go play our games and, Trivial Pursuit and Pictionary and all of that. And I remember once they were at our house in Atlanta and the kids were all upstairs supposedly sleeping and we were playing Pictionary. And it was always, Claire and me versus Tim and Rich. And it was their turn, and either Rich or Tim, they just draw like a little crooked line, and the other one goes alfalfa, and that was it. So I mean, they have the same brain cells. It's just scary, really, So yeah. So anyway, so Rich is a huge jokester. There's the whole coleslaw saga that one day I'll have to put in a book because it's just so hilarious. So anyway, I just thought, well, okay. So I have to give a little bit of thing about the coleslaw. We sneak coleslaw into each other's houses all the time, like without them knowing. It'll come in like in a gift basket or. Once at Thanksgiving, I put it inside the turkey. I mean, it's just, and then you're it. It's like tag, you're it. So we have to get more and more and more creative. So it was our turn. And I'm like, oh, what can I do? And I'm like, oh, I'm an author. I can create things. So I introduced a character in the Trad Street series, I think in the first book, Rich Cobelt. He's the handyman contractor. He always has low-slung pants in the back. That exposes a little too much for Melanie's taste. She's always like buying him suspenders for Christmas and stuff and to hold those pants up. But I have him in that, I think it's the first or the second book, I have him eating a coleslaw sandwich because that was like, aha, gotcha. Like try to top that.
That is really good.
But he's now very popular. He's the recurring character. And he's just really, really fun to write. So, and he's totally okay with it. But I love sticking his name in pretty much every book. So he's the handyman contractor in Trad series. But in the other books, you'll see him popping up. He's like a used car salesman. He's a human resource director in another book. He's a tow truck driver in one book. I mean, he's everywhere. So he's fun.
That is so fun. As we make our way to the release of the Christmas Spirits on Trad Street, so fun. Yes. You're going to be in Charleston.
I will be in Charleston. Yeah.
October.
And a lot of places.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go to my website. Tour. Check that out. But yeah, it's a full page.
Yeah, most definitely.
And this is what they're calling an abbreviated tour.
Yeah.
I've had 2-pagers before.
Oh, no, but that's a packed full page tour,
right,
for sure. Okay, well, let's kind of transition. Oh, well, before we move on from writing.
Well, I was going to say, because then I'm on book tour again in January.
Yeah, for
my other project. So I do a collaboration with my amazing friends and best-selling authors, Lauren Willig and Beatrice Williams, who are, best-selling authors in their own right. And one day, it might have been in a hotel bar. we got together and we were like, we should write a book together. And so we did. And that was The Forgotten Room.
Such a good book.
You know what? People are saying, why are you, you're each successful in your own right. Why would you do this? And, I have to say it really, for me, it sparks that writing passion to be writing with two other authors you really love and respect.
Yeah.
It's the most fun you could possibly have writing a book. And it's nice, too, because we do plan these books. My other books, I don't plan. But these you have to because you're writing with two other people. And we each take a character and time setting, and then we write it. And it's just a lot of fun. And plus, the planning, we go to some horrible place like, Palmetto Bluff, and there may be spas involved. Yes. And we do all that. We outline the book, and then, we go our separate ways, and there's a lot of emailing back and forth. We write round robin. And then we get together at some other horrible place, like, a beach house in Florida, and where there may be a pool. And, then we finish hashing it out and we turn it into our editor. And then we go on book tour together, which is what we call just really the real reason why we write these books. So we can go on a publisher paid girls trip. But so the first book was The Forgotten Room. It hit the New York Times hardcover list, which was very exciting.
Yeah.
And the next book was The Glass Ocean, also very successful and popular. And then the next book that comes out in January is All the Ways We Say Goodbye. And that's 3 storylines all connected by the Paris Ritz. So we have World War I, World War II, and 1960s. So very, very, I love this story. I love the characters. I think I've loved the other 2 books that we collaborated on, but this I think is our best so far.
I cannot wait for that to come out.
I can't wait for book tour.
Is January. Do we have a date?
January 14th, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be cold though.
Yeah. Hello. I know. Don't worry. I already bought my winter coat. So.
Yeah. And I loved your books. I always learn so much. So historical fiction, you do a ton of research to make sure every little thing is accurate.
Yeah, because somebody out there is going to write me if I get it wrong. Because it's funny, even when I do the research and I know I've got it right, I still get people writing to me saying I've got it wrong. And then I just pull out my piece of research and say, actually, because I spend so much time with the research, and it really bugs me when people and they get very upset, like, oh, how could you be so ignorant? I'm like, well, actually, I wasn't being ignorant. This is actual fact. And so.
Yeah. So there's all of that in writing historical fiction,
Right.
So much research to make sure that, it's accurate in addition to the character development.
Right.
So.
Right. And doing their character arcs in both time periods. And
yeah. And
oh
I don't know how you keep all of that straight because.
I don't either. I'm losing my mind.
You're not.
What was there it's not there as much anymore.
You have a beautiful, beautiful writing style, and it's just a pleasure to read your work. Personally, I know your kids are doing great. They're out of the house. You have an amazing husband, but a lot of your time and heart is really going towards your parents who are still alive, but they're getting older. And so that's called the sandwich generation.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I know a lot of us kind of fall into that. And, having the demands of a career, a very demanding career, but still being in the pocket, taking care of your parents. Do you want to share any about kind of that part of your life that's going on?
Yeah. And I think, I was at a book club last Thursday, and it was a book club of, a lot of women my age. And it was in a local neighborhood not far from me. And, it just astounds me how many women are in this group. And I love not only how accepting we all are of how we deal with it, because, there was one woman, her mother lives with her and she takes care of her. And I'm like, oh my gosh, bless you, because I know I could not do that. I could not do it. And I thank God that we have, other choices for women. So my mother has Alzheimer's, and she's had it for a long time, but she doesn't recognize me anymore. And sometimes when I see her, I think she does, and she's very sweet. And then other times she's not. And, and you have to understand it's the disease talking when she's saying, go away, I don't want to see you. So, and then my father has recently, I put him in assisted living. And yes, you remember how I said I had 3 brothers and always wanted a sister? This is the reason why I want a sister, because I'm doing 100% of it. It's no, they're not living with me, but every day, and I calculated, I spend about 20 hours a week doing, their insurance, their finances, their bill paying, the doctors, the medications. I oversee all of that. And it's exhausting. It's so much, especially when, as a creative person, when I'm writing a book, I don't need that phone call at 2 p.m. saying mom's fallen, she's in the ER, and then I have to, stop everything. And even just when I'm at home writing and I realize that, oh my gosh, I forgot to refill that medication for dad. I need to, quickly go online and take care of that, or go to Kennesaw to visit them, because they're about an hour away from me. I do have one brother who lives near them. And on the weekends, he's much better with the one-on-one, but, he works all week. His wife works. He's got 2 small kids, so it's really left to me to make sure that they're getting the care they need and all of that. So it's exhausting. I'm exhausted mentally and physically. And this has been going on for about 2 years now that I've been sort of the sole caretaker. And I was very, very angry at first and very resentful of my brothers and of the situation I was put in. And, it's just taken a lot of prayer and a lot of, talking to people who are in this boat to understand that, this is only a season.
Yeah.
And that I'm going straight to heaven. No, I'm kidding. But I find, as hard as it is, and I know they say, God tests you, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm done with tests. Can I, even school children get the summer off? Can I just have the summer off? And there is no off time, and I think the acceptance has it's been a long time, but I think I'm more accepting now. And also, that first year was me getting everything in place. It was, getting all of my parents' financial stuff, online, no passwords, power of attorney, all of that stuff, getting it all corralled, spending literally 100 hours on the phone with Medicare to get insurance stuff straightened out. That was the hardest stuff. And that finally is in line. And I think what was so hard in the beginning was that I thought my brothers would be doing some of that. Yeah. And that wasn't the case. I realized I'd be waiting for things to be done, and then I realized I needed to do it. Yeah. And as soon as I just accept that I'm going to be doing it, then it's just...
let go of the expectation.
Right. And yeah. So that's where I am. And they're both in a better place. We had, I think this past March was probably the worst month of my life. Both parents were in the ER for different reasons. My dad was literally losing his mind. And I, had to have him committed to an institution to be analyzed and all of that. And my brother who lives close to him, he and I did it together. Like, we both realized that this was too much for one of us to do. And so he really, we were big supporters. And I say it's brought that brother and me much closer together. Plus we can, get together and talk about the other two, but like how pathetic they are. That's one of the blessings, and I really, and you have to focus on those blessings. And I've gotten closer to my dad in many ways. And since he's been out of the institution and his medications are, his moods are regulated, he's more alert, he's more clear. He's definitely struggling with the beginning signs of Alzheimer's, but I understand that. And I'm working with his doctors. I'm getting the help he needs. And he's more accepting of my help now, and he wasn't before. And that was the other thing. When you're doing all this work and you're just getting yelled at all the time, it's very demoralizing. And you're trying to write 2 books, because I was writing the collaboration in my own book. March was just a very, very difficult time. I'm glad to see that month behind me. 2019 will not go down as my happy year.
Oh.
But I survived, and that's the thing. And it's funny because I think the words of from some of my books come back to haunt me, because I know one of my books, it's like, life doesn't get easier. We just get stronger.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. I mean, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, if I could have done what I've done in the last 2 years, I would have said, no. I could not do that. I just don't have it in me. I would just, no, I would fall apart. But when you realize that if you fall apart, nobody's going to be there to pick up not only your pieces, but I mean, my husband and my friends, thank God I've got such a good support system, and I have a strong faith, and I thank my parents for that. But if I fell apart, there would be nobody to pick up the pieces for my parents, nobody to do all that stuff. And I just, I pray every day, keep me strong, keep me healthy. Cause without that, I just, fall apart.
So hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
It's the worst. I mean, I remember having an infant and a toddler and a husband who traveled all the time. I thought life could never get harder. Oh yeah. At least they go to bed at 8, and I would have time to myself to read or whatever, and they were good sleepers and they were healthy. I mean, I was very blessed that way,
and you look back at those times and they're gone in a flash.
Oh, in a blink of an eye. And I remember, my mother saying that, oh, it'll be gone so quickly. I'm like, oh, it couldn't be gone quickly enough. And I bite my tongue now.
I know. Babies are gone. Yeah. And that whole thing as you walk through the valley, you don't stay there.
Right. No, you don't. And this is so funny that you should mention that, because the last ER visit with my mom that I went to, she'd fallen out of a wheelchair, broken her clavicle. So of course, I go down to Kennesaw, and my joke to everybody is that I'm like Norm in Cheers. Remember when you walk into the bar, everybody would go, Norm? Well, that's me at the Kennestone Hospital ER. They're like, Karen, because I'm there so often.
Seriously, they know you.
Yeah, and there was a point I was trying to make. Oh, so anyway, the last time I went, I was driving and the song comes on, and it's a country song, but the words are just so awesome. And because I'm not usually a country music listener, but I remember the song, and it's awesome. And I'm trying to, is it Rodney Atkins? I think, yeah. When you're going through hell, keep on moving. Don't slow down. Keep on going, maybe you'll get out before the devil even knows you're there. And the words of that song were just, I mean, they were speaking to me as I drove to the ER. And I was just like, yeah, okay, I get it. This is, and, if you're down on your knees, you might as well be praying, and just and it starts off, if you feel that you've got a sign on your back, say, kick me, you might as well, because everybody else is, and it's like, you're just so down, and you just keep
own it.
When you think you've hit bottom and you haven't, and I'm like, I get it. This is, just keep moving, just keep going, don't slow down, just keep moving. Because you will get through it. And I was like, oh, this is such a great song, such an important message. So I'm sitting in the ER with my mom, and she recognizes me, and we're having sort of a kind of a good conversation. And this man stops by where the little cubicle where we are, and he introduces himself. He was the chaplain for the day, and he's a rabbi. And I just see like kind eyes, and I just start crying, because it had been such a long road. And I'm sitting there, and he's like, you need somebody to talk to. I said, yes, I do. And he sat down with me, and he held my hand, and I'm telling him a little bit what I was going through. And he says, I'm a rabbi, and I know, you'll probably find it strange, but I like country music, and I listen to country music. And there's this song that has like the greatest words that, you might want to listen to. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? It was like one of those little God winks, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'll get through this. He's like, yeah, you will. So.
And that was the song he wanted you to listen to.
Yeah. So.
Oh my gosh.
So there are many blessings in this journey, and they, angels just appear in your life when you don't expect it.
Yeah. And I lost my mom to Alzheimer's. I lost my sister to Alzheimer's. It's my mother-in-law. It's a long, arduous journey. Heartbreaking.
Horrible.
So heartbreaking. But it's they're free, and you love them while you've got them.
Right. And I do find myself, having to become emotionally detached sometimes, so I can not take it personally, and to continue to just do the best that I can to get her and my dad the help they need. I had another, again, it's like you feel like you're all on your own, and like there's no help, and you're hitting your head against the wall, and then something happens and you're like, you're right, I'm not alone. And that happened the day that I had to go pick up my dad after institutionalizing him, and I just wasn't sure what I was going to run into.
Yeah.
And I walked by my bookshelf and I saw a book of devotions, and I happened to have 2 copies of it. It's called Dear Jesus by Sarah Young. And I remembered I had bought a copy for myself years ago. And I'd found it just really inspiring and helpful to me. And out of the blue, my Aunt Betty, my dad's sister-in-law, who's 90 and just sharp as a tack, lives in Biloxi, Mississippi, still drives, still, she reads all my books. She's like my number one fan. I love her.
Love that.
And she had sent me kind of out of the blue this devotional book, but I already had a copy. And as I was leaving the house to go pick up my dad from the institution where he was, the institute, I said, oh, I've got 2 copies here. Maybe this will help Dad. And I grabbed one. And I brought him back. I could tell he was, much better, but still depressed and, not happy with life as he'd been when he'd left. And my father's always had a strong faith. And I said, as I left him, I gave him the book of devotions. And I was saying, I found this very inspiring. Maybe, if you have some quiet time, sit down to read it. He says, yeah, I'll get to it later. And he put it on the side table and then left. And then I get a phone call the next day, and it's my dad. And he sounds like my old dad from 5 years ago. And he was saying, I was up all night, and this is the most amazing, it's changed my life. And he's really sort of been, yes, he got the help he needed. He's on, his moods are regulated. He's got good medication, being supervised, because I changed doctors for him, and he's just doing so much better. But he's, and he even called and said, I just want, I thank God today that you're my daughter. And, so the blessings are there. I just needed to put aside the anger, because this is life. This is
For now.
Yeah. For now. And, God doesn't promise you an easy life.
I know.
He promised you that you won't be alone on the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, Karen.
Yeah. But
It's
knowing you're
hard.
not alone on the journey is huge.
Yes.
Huge. And yes, you have your friends and your family, but just knowing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad they have you.
Thank you. I know my brothers are.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And I
had to
know.
put that dig in because it's just so ridiculous.
Well, and I know when you walk into that assisted living place, you bring a whole lot of love and sunshine, and I'm sure you're getting a lot of character thoughts.
Oh, I am.
Hanging out
And
in
one
the
day,
ER
give me
in
10
that
years.
place.
Give me 10 years and I'll write a book about it. But right now I can't. It's just, I can't. I use my fiction to escape. And to write about real life right now was not an escape. So.
Yeah. And I know I've heard you talk about how your parents don't really understand what you do.
No.
But then somebody shared a story of what was happening at the assisted living with your dad, and he was reading to your mom.
Yeah.
Please share that story.
My parents have this 60-year love affair. My dad is still so in love with my mom, and my mom doesn't always recognize him. Sometimes one of the caregivers has told me that, when my dad leaves, my mom will say, I don't know who that man is, but he sure is nice. And but he visits her every day, and that he's been reading those devotions to her. And she can still read. She'll read some of the passages, and then they'll share the scripture at the bottom, and she understand, and he said to me, she understands, I think she's getting better. And that breaks my heart, but you know what? I'm not going to say no, Dad, but that is a special time they share together. And I know it helps him because
his downfall mentally started when she got sick, and he was her primary caregiver. And he shielded us kids from, taking care of that. But yeah, so that's why, we keep them in the same, he's in assisted living now and she's in memory care in 2 different parts. But, everybody knows they're a couple, and he goes and, they sit and hold hands. They pray together, and it's
so
very sweet.
Well, and doesn't he read to her your books?
Oh yeah. Yes. Sorry. Yes. And she will read, and he says she follows along. I mean, whether she does or not, but yes, he does. He reads from my books, and, she gets surprised and sad at, the right parts and stuff, like she's at least following along for a little bit. So
I love that. That's a page from the notebook.
I know. And then, So, and I remember once when he was feeling better, he calls me, he's like, well, I just had a great day. And this, I'm like, what? Oh my gosh, who are you? What have you done to my father? And he says, yeah, so they were showing a movie. So they let me bring your mother out to my side so we could watch the movie. And it was so good. It was so funny. I said, what was the movie? He says, have you seen Mrs. Doubtfire? I'm like, yes. Oh my gosh. Yay.
What a great movie.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Robin Williams, God bless him. But yeah.
Okay, girlfriend. Well, I know you need to get going. I have one last question for you. So the word relevate means to uplift or inspire. Mm-hmm. So in closing, what might you say to my listeners about kind of what you do as a writer, or what you're going through with your parents? Just any closing words of encouragement for...
I would say never underestimate your impact on the world. Mm-hmm. When I'm writing in the privacy of my home, I don't truly understand the impact of my words. And I get so many lovely letters from people. One of my favorites was more recently of a woman. She and her mother were big fans of mine. And when her mother was dying, and in hospice care, that she asked her daughter to read aloud from one of my books. And she says that was one of her, fondest memories with her mom of, saying goodbye to her mom, was sharing something they both loved, which was reading in my books. And I was, how many people can say they can touch absolute strangers in such a profound way? Mm-hmm. And again, doing what I do for my parents, I know that I'm, maybe somebody there at the facility is seeing the good care or whatever, mm-hmm. and maybe that's inspiring them. I don't know, and just don't ever underestimate that you are working in a bubble and nobody sees or appreciates what you do.
Yeah, that's so important, because it feels like that a lot.
It does. You feel like you're slogging.
The work is hard.
The work is hard. The journey is long, and you're in the middle of it, and you just think, "Oh my gosh, why am I doing this? This is so ridiculous." And then you see those little winks in your life and those little pinpricks of light, and you're like, "Okay, yeah, it's worth it.
It's worth it." Karen White, you are a joy and a talent, and I'm so glad to call you my friend.
Thank you.
And
Likewise.
To be able to share this time together.
Thank you.
Hang in there, sister.
Thanks.
Sell some books.
Yeah, really.
Was that the notebook moment or what? When Karen was talking about her dad reading to her mom from the Jesus Calling devotional, and also from the books Karen has written. And how about the rabbi at the hospital prescribing a country song to help soothe Karen's troubled soul, which was the very song she had just been listening to? By the way, that song is called If You're Going Through Hell by Rodney Atkins. Highly recommend it. You can't make this stuff up. So many good nuggets shared from Karen for this episode. Don't underestimate the impact of your life. Make time to laugh and have fun. Do whatever it takes to get the job done or get the book written. Get lost in a good book. It's good for the soul. And if it's a Karen White novel, be prepared to laugh, cheer, and cry. A good plot line for a book and life itself. Wouldn't you agree? I'm Rena Olson, and this is Relevate.